With that question, I had others, but honestly, I think it's more important for you guys to ask questions. So we're going to open up the microphone. Feel free to step up. Ask these guys anything you want about games, their games, games in general, especially online games. So feel free to take the mic.
One of the big components of most MMOs is the social component. There's a lot of things within the game for players to kind of talk to each other, and the things that have evolved outside of the games, things like Ventrilo and TeamSpeak, where they can kind of connect. What are some of the things that maybe your company is either thinking or planning on, events that can be done outside to kind of promote the game and at the same time bring the players together?
I'll take a shot at that one. So it's a big push for us with Warhammer specifically to address those type of issues. Even within the game itself, we think that there's a lot of opportunities that have been missed in the past with other MMOs. You can look at World of Warcraft and you look at their societal and guild systems, and they really just scratch the surface. If there's one thing that I can point out with WoW and go, you just didn't do a very good job there, is their guild and community systems. It's not that it's bad, but it's just scratching the surface. And so when we look at how we're doing our guild and community systems, that's a major feature in our game, is what we're doing and how we're trying to draw people in from the very beginning, to encourage them to meet other people, to encourage them to group up with other people, to form guilds, and then to extend the guilds beyond the bounds of the game so that we extend the community out into the real world as much as we can. We want people to put down our game and go talk about it tomorrow at work. And we want people to go out on the web and post about it. And we want them to meet each other. And we're trying to encourage that in a number of different ways, both in and outside of the game. So for us, it's paramount.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of work can be done. I mean, you guys have pioneered that in Mythic on Dark Age, and your guild pages were some really innovative areas in that. Right. But I think in general, and something that we're trying to do in Turbine, is create this web access layer that allows the game to communicate outside of the web and then back, so that you can eventually connect chat, in-game email, without a game email, you can connect to PDAs, cell phones, etc. So a lot of that community building and community communication that can occur outside and inside the game, so that that seam or boundary between the virtual world and the real world is reduced.
I mean, again, we've been kind of lucky in this space with Eve, because we treat kind of social interaction as almost a core game mechanic for us. There's a lot of connections and a lot of, the people you know and the people who know you is a big part of the game. And we have, I hate the whole Web 2.0 thing, it gives me the creeps, but we've been looking at ways of kind of strengthening those bonds and giving players tools to say, we've got this connection, and let's see how we can develop tools to help with that kind of thing. We're kind of fairly early on with this stuff, so we're not really talking about it yet, but it's something we're looking at, definitely.
I think tools are a very important component, because obviously you could be creating more content than your actual game to support all of that stuff in supporting the game, if that makes sense. So a lot of the things that we're looking at, and I know folks have looked at before, is how far down the road do you go as a developer in taking those tools away from the players to form their own communities? Obviously, you don't want to give it all to them. In a lot of the IP work that I've done over the years, if you give someone, a themed drawing, let's say, I did some work for the Disney company, so if you theme a tablet with Mickey Mouse around it and give someone a crayon, I guarantee you what the first thing is that's going to be posted on the internet. It's not going to be something Disney would have wanted to see. And so you want to make sure that you sort of draw that line between how much you want to take on as a developer. Maybe that adds 2 or 3 or 4 more years to your game in order to support the community. But then all of a sudden the industry's blowing by you because you put so much time into that. So there really is a delicate balance there of how much you do around the game rather than focusing on the game itself. So just that's the add.
I think in the interest of the next question, questions, maybe since there's a big line up there, you guys can shoot one at a time if you want to do it that way. And this way we can move through things a little faster. You have one question. So go ahead, Chris.
I got one question. Why does it seem like all the MMOs coming out are fantasy-based when there's a huge component of players in the MMOs right now that would love a new sci-fi MMO?
Matt?
I mean, aside from Star Wars Galaxies, those are about the only 2 MMORPGs I can think of that are actually sci-fi based.
So we tried with Earth and Beyond in Electronic Arts. I had a little trouble with our competition over here.
What are the business reasons? Is it just because fantasy sells more than sci-fi, or is it?
So far-
The market share is about 98%, I believe, currently.
Of which
And-
96% is WoW.
Yeah, something like that. And part of it goes back to that familiarity comment that I made earlier and these barriers. People really understand the fantasy RPG mechanic. They understand that plate mail is better than chain mail, is better than leather armor. You go into the sci-fi arena or any other genre, it's a lot confusing. I mean, is an ion blaster bigger than a laser cannon? I don't know.
I think some of it, though, again, is just because the first kind of MMOs grew out of MUDs, and we haven't moved really away from MUDs that much over the last 10, 15 years, whatever. I think that's a shame. And I think if we started somewhere else, maybe we'd be decrying the lack of fantasy MMOs now. You know.
I think it will change. It can't get any worse.
It already is.
Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. My name is RJ. I'm from Air America Radio. I thank you for taking time to bring all these people together.
Thanks.
And when I listened to the conference and some of the issues that you brought up earlier, one of the things that comes to mind is user-generated content and the micropayment systems like that. And this is a very heated question. Is Second Life a competitor? And can anybody else out here answer the question of, do you think that there is going to be, my own question is Second Life a game? So is it a competition? Are they approaching the same vector base as anybody else? And can you speak a little bit to that? Everybody, thank you.
Second Life is not a competitor for us. I'm not going to comment on whether I think it's a game or not, but it's not the space that we're competing in. How's that? Second Life is a great world. It does great things, and it does them for its own purposes. But we're building a game that people can come into and in 2 minutes have a good time with. And Second Life probably doesn't have the same goals.
Takes at least a half an hour.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
All right. I wanted to say I'm definitely one of the more casual MMO type players, but I live with somebody who is anxiously awaiting me getting into EVE with its new in-station expansion. And so that's made me wonder, one of the reasons I've tried EVE is I just can't handle the game mechanics, but how much do... It's not, this is directed just at EVE. The question I have is, how diverse an audience, a target audience you guys try to reach? Do you try to look at things like, I know, again, I'm waiting for in-station because I can focus on that more than some of the other gameplay aspects. How much do you break games down into, we want to try to attract people who like going out and killing monsters constantly versus people who want to get into a more market-style atmosphere?
Go ahead, guys. Want to take that one?
I mean, I don't know what to say to that. I mean, yeah, it's obviously been a problem with, not a problem, but a thing we've been aware of in EVE for a long time is that some people don't want to be a spaceship, people want to be a person. And that's cool, you know. And we do, you know, as you know, we're adding this stuff so we can do this. We do try to, if we find an area where, like, we know there's people who would love the game, if we just, then we'll do it. But we're not going to say, these people don't want to play the game, what can we do to, you know, completely change their minds? How can we change the game completely to bring them in? You know, if they don't want to play EVE, that's cool. You know, they can play something else, they can play Solance's game with, you know, big multi-spaces, kind of
I think every one of us will answer similarly to that, where we have a core group of people that we want to target. Everybody will say, and we'd like that to be as big as it possibly can be. And everybody will say, well, we try to attract the casual gamer, we try to attract the hardcore gamer, we try to attract the player killers and the monster killers and the collectors and the crafters, and we'll all have a scheme within our games for doing that. And they'll all be a little bit different, some will be the same. So that's a tough question.
Thank you.
Does anyone else want to comment on that? Go ahead, Carl.
I was going to ask a question about the sci-fi games that was asked earlier, but I'm going to expand on that. With the success of something like Mass Effect, which took it was a concept a lot like Knights of the Old Republic. They brought it down without any licensing, and they made it a very easy game. Do you guys think that maybe no one's willing to make the real plunge to see if sci-fi will sell? Because I think it will. because Mass Effect is extremely successful. It was the interface was intuitive. There was nothing. I really don't buy that. The sci-fi gamers that we are can't figure out what weapon's going to do more damage. It just kind of seemed like a cop out. I mean, maybe no one's willing to take the plunge to hit sci-fi.
I think soon you might see, forays into that. Like you look at Tabula Rasa, which just came out. I mean, people are willing to do that, but it's tough. I think you hit it on the head. It's what chance do you take? I don't buy that it can't be done. I don't think any of us do. It's more like we all sit and think about it and talk about our next game and where's the property? What do you want to make? How are we going to make it? And it's that familiarity with fantasy that's so attractive to a lot of us. But I guarantee you're going to see some stuff in the next couple of years that are going to hit the shelves that are going to be awesome for sci-fi. It's going to happen.
I would also add to that, putting something on a label, whether it's fantasy or sci-fi, might not have the finger on the right pulse on that one, because I would argue Star Wars is fantasy. It's just sci-fi based, but it's the storytelling elements, and then when you get to the game, it's what wrapper do you put around it, whether it's the UI, the community aspects, or whatever. As long as the content that's in there, Mass Effect's a perfect example. The content that's in there happens to be set in a genre that doesn't have swords and dragons, but really it's more about the content in general. And right now, there's a great familiarity with fantasy. I know what I'm getting into when I get in there. So
I kind of suspect that some of it's just someone sat down and done the numbers and found that there's more people interested in fantasy than sci-fi, therefore fantasy games will sell more, therefore let's make a fantasy game. And regardless of the fact that there's a niche which will sell and it's been completely underserviced at the moment, let's go for the biggest possible audience. And, I'm not saying that everyone's doing it that way, but I think in some cases that's what's happening. It's just question of audience size.
Great example on the film side where it's been the exact opposite. For years and years, all the big films were sci-fi films. But fantasy had been consistently failing until Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Narnia, etc. And now that equation's been changed. And so I expect on the game side the exact same thing's going to happen.
I think part of it is going to require a change that, similar to what Craig mentioned earlier, with people finally taking consoles and with shooters, and how successful like Call of Duty 4 and stuff has been, for example, on the console. It's going to be seeing things like that. It's like the first person to actually successfully pull off a Counter-Strike, like MMO, for example, is going to open the doorway to like almost an entirely new thing. And I think that when you see that door open, then you're going to see a lot more of the influences that will come with, environments that include projectile and fancy laser weapons and stuff like that.
I think COD 4 was almost the place where you could almost charge $5 a month and people would go for it. And I think maybe that's what that may even be important to know, thinking behind the leveling system and stuff, is how popular is this going to be, can we do this? And I think I wouldn't be surprised if pretty soon now they're going to monetize that.
Go ahead, next question.
Most online games tend to focus around combat, with notable exceptions to some degree. Now, typically, they will include other aspects such as crafting. Some games such as Dark Age, you could repair the keeps that were sieged. But often these things are, let's say, lackluster at best. Their implementations are interesting, but not very interactive. You hit a button, you go get a cup of coffee, you come back, it's done. What about the future? Why can't we make those elements more interactive? Why can't we add things like the diplomacy sort of class or sort of activity? We saw this with, I believe it was Vanguard, where they actually had the card game. EverQuest 2 had an interactive crafting system so that you didn't just spam a key. You actually had to fight the system to make what you want. You could not automate this. Why don't we see more of those? Is it just time? Is it just lack of interest? Or do people just say, let's just hedge on the fighting bet?
Go ahead, guys.
Well, I'll say this from having worked as an QA and like a system design of Star Wars Galaxies. Like the original core design document for that game was almost 400 pages, and every single social system that you could think of was practically a game design document in and of itself. And what it really comes down to, I think, a lot of time is not a desire from us as designers or anything as to what we'd like to see, but it comes down to cost versus reward, sort of the amount of time that you put into some of these like really fancy systems and how many people are going to use it. Now, if I can put a diplomacy system in the game and know that like 90% of the people that are going to play my game are going to use that and love it, then it's well worth, you know, the hundreds of man hours it's going to take to put that thing together. But if only 2% of your population or whatever is going to take advantage of something, it all becomes sort of a sad cost analysis, no matter how good the idea is.
I'm here at an MMOG panel, but whatever happened to MMORPG? Where a lot of games, you're really missing out on the RP aspect. You know, AOC, Warhammer, they're all pushing the PvP. Eve is always pushing the, I imagine, pushing the economic part. You don't, and you know, even if there is a lot about community, you don't really see a lot of role playing. You just talked about earlier, the first question, how you want to break away, you want to have the game and real life kind of merge. You want people to talk about it outside. But what about the people who just want the game to be itself? The game is a world that they want to live in, they want to role play in, and there's not really a lot of support for them.
I think the best role-playing game is the one that's the most open-ended. I mean, to me, still, Ultima Online is probably the best role-playing, massively multiplayer game that I've ever played. And that was because of the flexibility that we had as a player to kill each other, to build our houses, to decorate, to make our own groups, our own alliances, and to, you know, whatever, put our wishes on the world, so to speak.
Yeah. So that's one of those things as a developer you have to look at, and it comes down to what we've kind of talked around in many cases as to what is the biggest bang for our buck. Sadly, there is some scale of open-ended world that you can go and role play in and do all sorts of crazy cool stuff in, and not so open-ended where we guide you through the world and feed you game as much as we possibly can. And some people like this and some people like that, and so somewhere on that scale is where each one of us fall. And some of our games are going to be a little more conducive to true role-playing where you can go out and do what you want to do. Some of our games will be a little more or a little less conducive to that, where we're guiding you through the actual gameplay itself, handcrafted, professional gameplay. So I don't think it's that anybody tries to ignore it. I think it's exactly what Jason was talking about earlier of bang for the buck. It's like, where do we focus our time and energies to make sure that we provide the best experience to our players and that they keep coming back to us? And it's a decision that each of our studios is making. Where do we want to fall in that? And you'll see some of these games that are coming out, they'll be very role play, and they'll give a lot of opportunity for that. And depending upon the world that you build, there'll be more or less opportunities depending upon the types of servers you put up and the type of tools that you use to support your role players. You know, but it all depends on the studio and the decisions they make.
I'm going to shuffle through, guys, the last 5 questions. We can kind of move quick.
Just a quick question. We don't get to see how competitive is on the inside between games and developers. I mean, like, Jason, did you pop a bottle of champagne when Warhammer was delayed, or like Jump to Lightspeed fell on its face? You know, is there things, or when you see other games take things from your game and use it in there, does it upset you, or is it more like, yo, you're proud that they took something that I made? Wow. You know, like, really, is it competitive on the other side? We don't get to see it. I mean, the fans are competitive, as you can tell, on forums and stuff, but is it behind the scene? Are development teams, are companies competitive with each other?
Well, obviously, as companies, I think the MMO space, I don't feel it's that competitive. We're sort of our own worst enemies in terms of our own success and failure, and we're a hits-driven business. A good game will sell.
That's right.
Now, my main concern with my competition is that we don't ship on top of one another. I mean, if we can kind of spread things out, it makes things a lot easier, and we're not always very good about hitting our release dates, and so that can be hard. It's kind of a moving target to sort of separate from one another, but even at this forum, our gameplay styles are quite a bit different. And so, I don't feel it's that competitive. Now, ask me when the business flattens out 10 years from now, and we're fighting for every last little tenth of market share. It'll be an entirely different, Coke, Pepsi type world. But that's not where we are today.
Yeah, if you look at us and games that are coming out, or games that have just come out, or games that are still in planning, and we're not the one who. Yes, we're competing with each other. Like we're competing with Conan, of course we are. But we want to see them succeed. We want them to come out. We want them to grow the genre. We want them to grow the space. We want them to take away from other people out there who we're really gunning for. And that's World of Warcraft. I mean,
who said you were going to name
You look at WoW, and they're the ones that, of anybody to ask that question to, it's like, well, everybody up here, yeah, we're really friendly. We're friendly with those guys too. We know the guys at Blizzard. But they're the ones who have the market share, and we need to take away from them and or expand the market. But they've already done that job for us. They've expanded it quite a bit. Now we just want some of it back.
That wasn't the fun answer you were hoping to hear.
We had dinner with Scott last night and pop champagne with him. So
Just real quick, guys.
Okay. As a casual gamer, my biggest turn off is the paying a monthly bill for a game. Is there any way you could do like ad revenue business model or something? Maybe a basic free account and premium upgraded account with super weapons or whatever.
So you kill a guy and like the Burger King stands up. Woo!
I think I've got this theory that we're going to see in the next 5 or 10 years a sort of divergence of MMOs between the ones who are going to go the full MMO. Let's make use of the fact that we're using this massive servers and there's masses of people online and actually leverage that fact. And the people who will do things like Guild Wars, where like everything's instant. You only need like 20 or 30 people in the same place at the same time. Why are we building this huge, massive server infrastructure that can support this stuff if they're basically just meeting up in a town and splitting up and going their own ways? Other ways of, I think that we're going to find ways of delivering the core gameplay that games like WoW and Guild Wars are giving without requiring as much of a fee, at least for the servers, because they're just not requiring as much processing power and as much kind of infrastructure investment.
Yeah, to me, product placement, I'm sure like the motion picture industry does product placement. As long as the Burger King doesn't pop up in a fantasy game or a Pepsi machine or something like that. I mean, obviously, if you're doing fantasy, it's obviously a lot harder. Maybe you could put a wrapper around the intro screens or something like that. Industry's been fairly resistant to that in almost every genre. So, again, going back to fun is king, content is king. Just have to be really careful with that stuff that it doesn't start bumping into the actual gameplay experience.
Although I do have to say that quite surprisingly to me, because I'm quite the naysayer, or kind of what my opinion was in this, is that working at Funcom, I was really surprised at the success that Anarchy Online had with the in-game advertising. We actually brought in a lot more income, and we saw a lot more people download and experience the game since we did that, like well over 1 million. So.
Next question, please. We're just almost in the last few minutes, so if you guys want to make it quick.
So, I mean, more often than not, MMOs would, products describe themselves as a persistent virtual world, and I never really thought the use of the word persistent as an adjective, because, you're going in, there are tons of people kind of in the different stages of the archetype of the game's plot, and the story isn't really in the hands of the player. I mean, will we ever see a game in which the story and the plot set that it might have a collision of the player change?
So let me give you my Warhammer answer. To answer your last question, I think it's super difficult. Because you have so many people coming in at different life cycles, different stages throughout the game, having somebody affect the entirety of the game from up here when somebody's coming into down here is a significant hurdle, like significant. On the other hand, there are meta games that you can put in place, like we have in Warhammer, that allow you to change the world, and that change the world for everybody. Things where you can, and I'm not going to get into Warhammer details, I'll try to stay away from it, but things that can affect the world that do affect everybody, and that you can look at one server and it will be different than another server. And by living in this server, you get a little bit of a different experience than you do by living in this server. So I think there are things that can be done that are being done, but to actually have a massive story arc that one person is following that's changing the world that isn't affecting the other 1,000 people online, man, that's rough. I'm not sure how people are going to do it, though I know there are people that are trying to.
I mean, it's our little, we're off in our weird corner doing our own thing, but I kind of we don't have that problem so much, I don't think. I mean, sure, in terms of the backstory and the official story plotline thing, player influence is limited, but the real story of the online is the story of the players, and the story of the alliances out in 0.0 and the wars they fight and the politics and the backstabbing and the history and the grudges that go back 5 years now. And people are having a real impact on that story every single day in our game, and it's always been the case and it always will be.
We can go to the last two real quick, guys. We're almost out of time.
So, just from answering these questions, I've heard you guys talk a lot about bang for your buck, and you're not going to put a feature in if only 10% of your players are going to play it. I'm really curious how you figure that out. Do you take polls, or is it trial and error? Do you learn from the competitors' mistakes? And where did that statistic come from?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time on this, and so we have 3 big areas. We do something called player profiles, where we're constantly interviewing and surveying our existing player base, and those tend to be the most positive because they're in the game and staying with the game and relatively happy. And we rank the features, and then we rank sort of the difficulty, and we obviously do the things that are easiest, that have the biggest payoff. Secondly, we do a lot of extensive exit surveys, where we actually interview people that leave the game and figure out why. And hopefully it's because they're going back to school, or there's some personal event in their lives, not that they're sick of the product, but not always the case. And sometimes they will list, this is exactly why we're leaving, and so we'll focus on those areas. And then lastly is the press. We monitor very closely what the websites like Hammer and others say about us, and we're very focused on addressing those concerns as well. And those 3 ways sort of take the pulse of the community, and we react accordingly.
It's me again, sorry. So, when you're looking for stuff, I think it's possible to kind of get a little bit the wrong end of the stick. And if you look at something and you can say only 10% of our players will use it, therefore it's not a good use of our time. But you've got to look at the effect it'll have on the game, and are those 10%, the effect activities of those 10% going to knock on to the rest of the game? I mean, we have all our stuff out in 0.0, the Alliance stuff and all this stuff. And it's not a big percentage of the player base, but it's important for the game that it's there, and it has trickle-down effects for the whole economy. And a lot of players play the game, and they love the fact that it exists and that the game world they're playing in has that feature, even though they have no desire whatsoever to get involved in it. So sometimes you have to look at it and you say, it's not going to hit a big chunk of the player base, but it's good for the game that we do this, and you've got to make the hard decision and say, we're going to do it anyway. And, economics have to have their say, but...
Well, I didn't mean to imply that it's all analysis, what he's saying. It's not necessarily, is this going to make us money? It's all about what fits your game and whether you're servicing your player base. It's more a case of not, is that 10% going to make you pay for itself? It's like, is this, putting this in for this small group of people going to trickle down, like he said, or is it only going to serve this small group of people? And and it also depends on how much time it is. Like you said, you look at issues that you can fix easily. Getting the right sound on the power droid in Star Wars Galaxies because people wanted to hear it go gong. Something small like that versus adding in the ability, a whole new system, or whatever. It's all balance.
Yeah, bang for the buck is, how much fun is it? I mean, is it the right thing to do for the game?
We'll just go to the last question. We're very much over time, but go ahead real quick.
The probably more unique to MMOs as opposed to other games is the players determine fun of the other players as opposed to necessarily just the content. So what are you guys doing to prevent the Chuck Norris spam in general, or the random person in your dungeon group who goes, I'm going to pull these guys even though I'm not the person who's supposed to?
Isn't that almost the beauty of MMOs as well as the
Yes, I know, it makes great stories later.
Isn't Leroy Jenkins an iconic figure now? I think we can all answer that question in a lot of different ways, but what I said was, it's true. That's one of the things that we all laugh about. It's one of the things that make things fun. And for the moment, you might not love it. And so, of course, we give you tools, things like, if they're spamming, chat channels, maybe we limit the way that chat can be spammed in technical ways. Maybe we put ignores in. There's a lot of tools that we're going to give the player to help ensure that they can have a good time. Especially in PvP games, and a lot of us up here have PvP games, we're always very careful to limit the way that other players can impact you negatively, even in a PvP game. We want it to be fun. Even though I'm coming out and I'm trying to kill you, we want it to be fair. We want it to be interesting. We want it to be as fun and great of an experience as we can give you. So I could go system by system through probably any game out there and say, and this is what they did, and this is what we're doing, and this is why we did it that way. So we're, of course, always paying attention to that. But don't forget the beauty of having the big society. Don't forget the beauty of non-instance space where you're butting heads with other people and elbowing for the final poll. I think that players have a tendency to not see that and see the beauty of the fun of society. And that's what MMOs are about. They're about community and society and playing with other players.
I'd also say, in regards to the question a little while ago about role-playing game servers specifically, is that when you're role-playing with your 6 buddies and you all decide that we're all going to speak Old English tonight or whatever, that's all great when you're with your 6 buddies, but when the 7th guy comes in and completely insults you for that, it blows the fun factor. However, you can look at it the other way, and I completely agree. That fun factor is part of thousands of people all at the same place.
Our game is not fair. There are winners and there are losers as part of the way it's done. So,
And I just add a certain amount of briefing, like you said, is okay in limited amounts. But there are other things that you need to actively police. I mean, the gold farming problem is just downright annoying. I mean, you're getting gold spammed over and over again. It's sort of, I mean, it is the farthest extreme from role playing. I mean, now you feel like you're in the middle of a bunch of hucksters trying to sell you things. And those kind of challenges, or really abusive behavior that can border on criminal. And we need to take a lot of our compliance and other items very seriously. And so it's that top tier where we focus all of our energy on. And then the general chaos of MMOs, you're right, that's just kind of part of the fun.
I think Craig summed it up to end it best as the general chaos of MMOs. We all live in very much. So, guys, I just want to ask you to give the guys a hand.